Welcome to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton. He's locked, loaded, and ready to fire. Lawton Online starts right now.
Hello and welcome to Lawton Online. This is Andrew Lawton. You're listening to the Rebel.media. So great to have you tuned into the program. I think we're going to have a great show up ahead. We're going to cover a lot of ground here, talking about issues of importance across the country and even perhaps in your local community. That is, if you live in Hamilton, Ontario. But it's not a municipal story. It's just a story that happens to have taken place in Hamilton here. And this is a big one, especially for people who own guns or people who support the rights of gun owners. I am a firearms owner. I make no bones about it. I'm happy and proud to be that way. And I know a lot of other people who are. And ultimately, I think of any media outlet that is going to pay attention to this issue, the Rebel seems to be the only one that does it. Formerly Sun News Network. Thank goodness it was around during the High River gun grab for Albertans. But this is a story that takes place in the driveway of a Hamilton man. His name, I kid you not, is Peter Kill. K-H-I-L-L, but I'm pretty sure it's still pronounced Kill. He's 26 years old, and he has been charged with second-degree murder. Now, the backstory of this is 1 week ago, so last Thursday, he went downstairs, went outside, and in his driveway at 3 a.m. on Thursday morning, someone was stealing his truck. The attempted thief was 29-year-old John Stiers. When Mr. Kill went out to confront him, he brought a firearm. I don't know what kind of firearm. I don't know the details of how long this truck theft was going on, but he was armed and confronted the man. There was an issue that ensued from there, and Mr. Stiers was killed, died as the result of gunshot-related injuries, according to police. So Peter Kill was charged with second-degree murder after defending his property. Now, there are a lot of unanswered questions about this, and some of these questions dramatically alter the focus of what's actually happening here. But let's nip one thing in the bud right here, because there seems to be a lot of ignorance to this. You have in Canada the right to defend yourself. You have the right to not just defend yourself, but to defend yourself with force. If someone is threatening your life, your family, or even your property, you can use what is basically designated a reasonable amount of force. Now, what's reasonable? Well, that's a question that unfortunately judges have to answer. It isn't clearly defined in the law because it does depend on individual situations. And if, when this case goes forward, we learn that Peter Kill came down with a gun and the thief had been running away and was shot 4 times in the back and collapsed in the middle of the street, then I would say no, that was not reasonable force. If what we learn from this case actually reveals that, to the contrary, Mr. Stiers tried to fight Peter Kill, came at him, attacked him in some way, then I have no sympathy whatsoever for that man who was shot. I say Peter Kill made the right call. Good for him for thinking quickly and protecting himself. And yeah, of course, his truck. Never get between a man and his truck and a man and his dog, right? That's the old saying. So why is this so difficult for people to understand? Because Canadians want to believe that violence doesn't exist. Canadians want to believe that threats don't exist. That we can just go through the world, that there is never a need to use force, everything's fine, everything's hunky-dory, and no one is at risk of absolutely anything. This is the fantasy world in which so many Canadians like to reside. And it's a dangerous one. You know, police are part of the problem here. I have a great deal of respect for law enforcement, but unfortunately a lot of them do not have a respect for gun ownership rights, nor even for the right to defend yourself. There are a few cases here that I can think of, even without looking, and I've researched some of the details on them. A man in Toronto, a restaurateur, a few years ago, fending off a robber threw, I think it was marsala or curry or some Indian spice at the man, and was charged with using a noxious substance Now, look, you may not like Indian food. It may not be your cup of tea. It's not a noxious substance when it's all you can throw at someone and you do it, and it works. And then we look at a really, really horrific case. A man in Port Colborne who was charged, dragged through the absolute ringer because he fired a warning shot. Didn't even damage anyone or harm anyone. Fired a warning shot after his farm had been attacked. It had been firebombed with Molotov cocktails. The doghouse burned down. I believe the dog was injured or came very close to being injured, if I recall that case correctly. And the man who fired the warning shot had video surveillance of this happening. He was the one who was charged. Self-defense is a right. But remember that your rights are only as powerful as the government's ability and willingness to protect them. Rights are only as valid as the government's recognition of them, which unfortunately doesn't exist all that often. And again, you can use a firearm to defend yourself. This is in the law as well, as long as you are using a reasonable amount of force. If someone comes at you with a knife and you have a gun, well, I think that's pretty darn reasonable. But we have a few big problems here that we need to address. Number one, in Canada, the law does not necessarily interact or speak that clearly to other segments of the law. For example, you can use a gun that you own lawfully in your own self-defense, but you can't own a gun for that purpose. And I remember this very well when I was getting my restricted firearms license. I was asked by a member of the OPP, because they do a lot of the vetting and interviewing process, and she asked me, that's the Ontario Provincial Police, why do you want it? And I had been told in advance of this, so it was never an issue, do not under any circumstances say self-defense. If you do, you won't get it. So I said what was the truth, which was that I wanted to go target shooting. And that was exactly why. But don't think that I would hesitate for a moment if I needed to protect myself or my family any way that I absolutely had to. And it's difficult because no one wants to imagine themselves being in that situation. But the fact is, the world is a scary place. And in Canada, for one, storage laws have made it a little bit precarious sometimes. If someone's breaking into your house, you have a life and death situation. Well, okay, got to open the gun safe, open it up, go somewhere else, get the magazine, okay, load it up, put it together, boom, you're ready. It took you like 19 minutes if you're not that skilled, but tough luck. Now, skilled people can do it in a heck of a lot better a time than that. I'm not there yet. But it's not about that. It's not about these individual stories. It's about the broader question of rights. Government lives off of your dependence on it. So, in fact, a lot of government agents and government officials kind of like that people need to rely on them for their own safety and protection instead of being able to do anything on their own. But I look at Peter Kill protecting his property. Well, people have said, well, theft is wrong, but stealing a truck doesn't mean you deserve to die. And I would be inclined to agree. We don't have capital punishment in this country, and if we did, theft of a truck would probably not in and of itself be a capital offense. But if you are resisting arrest, because let's face it, Peter Kill was completely within his legal right to arrest as a citizen John Stiers. If he was resisting arrest, being violent, well, then maybe using that firearm that he had isn't that terrible an idea. So there's been petitions on both sides of this, over 12,000 signatures saying that the police and the Crown should withdraw charges against Peter Kill. A petition to the contrary has, I think, over 800 names. And that's called Justice for John Stiers. Yes, we do need more people to stand up for the rights of thieves that can't even summon the wherewithal to actually complete the theft. Most people seem to be in agreement here, though, that second-degree murder is harsh. And I say most people by talking about most sensible people. If you have the right to defend yourself and your property, why do you become the guilty one here? Why does the person who is actually committing the crime, who started this, become the victim? So there is going to be inevitably more information that comes out about this, and I'm withholding judgment on the specific case until I learn what that information is. But in general terms, I think it's more of an interesting story to look at the response to a case like this. To look at all the people who, first off, don't know what rights you have in Canada. People say, well, why didn't he shoot him in the foot? Why didn't he shoot him in the arm? Why didn't he, shoot the gun out of the guy's hand? Not in this case, but in general. And then this brings up another question, which is, well, first off, you can get sued by someone you shoot and don't kill. That's not a serious response to this, though. The bigger part of it is that if you're discharging your firearm, you have to be justified to kill that person. Otherwise, you're in a world of hurt. It's the same reason the police didn't just shoot the knife out of Sammy Yateem's hand. They had to shoot him because if Constable Forzillo thought he was a threat, you're justified to kill him. So let's dispense with this notion that firearms are never going to save your life. I talked about this on my radio show the day after it broke, and I was discussing this in a broader context, and I had this liberal caller who called in and said, well, if you don't have a firearm, then people aren't going to use a firearm if they try to rob you. And he said, but if they think you have a firearm, they'll bring a firearm. Actually, I think if someone thinks you have a firearm, they're going to stay the heck away from you. And this is why when we look at Project Veritas, a group in the U.S. that does a lot of undercover videos, James O'Keefe runs it. He did a great experiment a couple of years ago. I can't remember what the debate was, but there was one of the big gun control debates going on. And he went to and had, not him personally, but his undercover operatives, if you will, to a number of houses of known gun control advocates, people in media, people with organizations that have spoken out in favor of gun control. One of them was Torre, who is an MSNBC contributor. And they went door to door posing as members of a pro-gun control group, saying, we're rallying up, we're getting support that we need to control guns, restrict guns, ban guns, etc. And all the people were like, yeah, that's great, awesome work, we're happy to help. Okay. Then the people would say, would you like to lead by example here? We'd like to have you put up a sign on your lawn that says this is a gun-free home. Not one single person agreed. Not one single person agreed. Some of them just said, look, get away, I'm not putting up a sign, I support you, but I'm not putting it up. But some of them even said, oh, no, I don't want to advertise that we can't protect ourselves. People said, gun control advocates said, oh, well, I don't want it known that there are no firearms here. And I laughed and cried when I watched that. Metaphorically, of course. Real men don't cry, all that sort of stuff. But I laughed. And I was shaking my head, though, in anguish, wondering how these people can be so ignorant to their own transparency. Because, let's face it, you can protect yourself. And as much as no one's advocating for a return to the wild, wild west where duels are the preferred means of settling scores, every time you walk across the street, you're trying to avoid being in the crossfire. But at the same time, we also have to be prepared to accept reality. Criminals are, by definition, people that have no respect for the law. They're going to darn well find weapons if they're going to commit a crime. And people say, well, you know what? A truck theft does not warrant shooting. Well, what does it warrant? Now, again, I'm not a judge, but I'm asking this question because people need to be prepared to evaluate in themselves what the answer is. Would you be justified in going up to someone stealing your truck and grabbing them with your hands and throwing them away? Would you be justified in walking up with a baseball bat and banging that on them until they walked away? Would you be justified to take a shovel, a metal shovel that you had, and use that to get them away? A knife, a gun. At what point does your right no longer become your right to protect your property? I think that the threat of a gun can do a lot more harm than actually discharging it in a lot of cases. And that's why I've said with this Peter Kill case, a lot of the details are going to, as the saying goes, be where the devil is. Because I can't imagine if you are just some petty truck thief looking for a fix, that if someone comes out holding a gun, you are going to do anything but run away. I can't imagine someone hanging around that long because they wouldn't be preparing for that. You know what? This is Canada. But if you're looking at someone who is a junkie, you're looking at someone who maybe they have a weapon themselves, someone who tries to throw a punch, etc., tries to take the gun, I don't know. Then yeah, I think your justification is very much there. Or what if you have a family? Or what if you have something in that vehicle that is a weapon? What if the person is trying to take a weapon? I don't know. These are all of the different variables that have to be considered here. And the fact that there exists in Canada so much ignorance surrounding self-defense in the first place is part of the problem here. But I also think we need to recognize that in a lot of cases, it's not just ignorance. It's not just people not knowing what the self-defense laws are in Canada. It is that we have people that don't value that is in fact necessary. People that don't value that, hey, any free society needs to enshrine in it the right for people to protect their own life when the state can't. It's going to take a heck of a lot less time for you to take a gun out of your holster or even out of your nightstand than it is for the police to show up and save you. It's going to take a heck of a lot more time for someone else with a gun to come and help you than it will be for you to help yourself. So why do we deny that right? Is it self-preservation? The government wants to make sure it's the only one that is armed. I think it sounds conspiratorial, but I think there's some truth to it. I agree with some of, by the way, the mechanisms that we have in Canada to protect people from people that have guns and shouldn't have them, such as screening out convicts, etc. But we also have in Canada a very meaningless and bureaucratic system where we allow the concealed carry of firearms. People don't realize this. You can get an authorization to carry if you are in one of a very narrow set of parameters where you can earn it. If you've survived attempts in your life, for example. But even then, I think, and again, this is anecdotal, I think you have to have survived like 3 assassination attempts before you can get an authorization to carry. So if you are lucky enough to have survived 3 times, or as the case is in most of them, you knew someone in the Canadian firearms program who got you the authorization to carry, then you can do it, but otherwise you can't. But there are people walking around who have a right to carry a firearm. Has the country dissolved as a result of it? Has our democracy crumbled? Have we turned into this war-torn, wintry region in this world because of that? No. Because they're responsible, law-abiding citizens who, frankly, most people would love to have around in a pinch if something went wrong than to not have. And I was reading into, generally speaking, people's response to this case on social media, to the Peter Kill case in Hamilton. And it just baffled me. I mean, it didn't surprise me. But it shocked me how much misinformation there is about there. People saying, well, guns are illegal in Canada. Really? That's news to me. Better not check my gun safe. People saying, well, yeah, but you can't actually have a loaded firearm. Well, if you are using it to defend yourself, you darn well can. People that just don't know. The problem is we also have an issue with a lot of reporters who don't know. I can't count how many times I've seen about, police having seized 2 automatic .22 rifles. Yeah, there's a difference between automatic and semi-automatic journalists, but that seems to, again, be an error that is lost on so many of the press gallery in Canada. So when we look at this case, like the Lucky Moose place in Toronto, like the Port Colborne case, like any other situation where someone has had to use force to defend themselves that has been to any observer reasonable, we have to ask why the state is not recognizing or defining reasonable in the same way that any sensible human being would. Perhaps because the state is made up of people who aren't in fact sensible. That may be the answer. And you know what? I think I said on a previous show, my general understanding or rationalization of any political issue is to assume that government is inept. And once you use that as sort of your first litmus test, things start to make a lot more sense. And sometimes I'll need to check myself, or my fiance will have to. I'll say, but why on earth would? And then she'll say, actually, she'll say nothing. She'll just look at me and I'll be like, oh, yep, government's inept. That's why. That doesn't mean I don't mock it relentlessly, but it helps me at least sleep at night knowing why some of these decisions are being made, because people don't know any better. So I think we need to change self-defense laws in this country, not by making them more strict, but if anything, by making them more clearly defined. Say, yes, you have the right to defend yourself. It already exists on paper, but let's make it more clear with whatever you need and you have at hand. And I think there is a question here of what about your property? Is your property defending that the same as defending your person? I think if you're defending against someone who is violating your rights, that is the most important quality there. And this is not about a street-side execution. It's about dealing with a criminal in the act who isn't prepared to surrender. That's how I interpret this case anyway. We've got to take a break here. When we come back, more Lawton Online on the rebel.media. I'm Andrew Lawton. We'll be right back.
He's irreverent, intelligent, and indefatigable. You're tuned in to Lawton Online with Andrew Lawton.
Welcome back. This is Lawton Online here on the rebel.media. Wanting to take a little bit of a trip outside of Canada for now because I have been a little bit scaled back, I'll say, in coverage of the U.S. election and nomination process. And it's not for lack of interest, by the way. It's more that it's changing so quickly and the polls have, well, for Donald Trump, not really changed that much at all, that I haven't wanted to commit too heavily until we started to see a little bit more in terms of actual results. Well, with the New Hampshire primary behind us, this is now one of those very shows. So as you know by now, Socialist Senator Bernie Sanders won the Democratic primary, and even though Hillary Clinton ends up with like as many or more delegates out of it, we'll talk about that in just a moment, it's a little bit convoluted, and the bombastic billionaire Donald Trump won very handily the Republican primary in New Hampshire. Now, while it is in fact possible to win the nomination without having won New Hampshire, and to win New Hampshire and lose the nomination, it certainly makes it a lot easier. From a fundraising perspective, and more importantly, from a narrowing of the field perspective. We already saw Chris Christie and Carly Fiorina the day after the New Hampshire primary pull out, and most importantly, the momentum. New Hampshire is pretty darn important. So Ted Cruz carries Iowa, Donald Trump carries New Hampshire. We're looking at Super Tuesday coming up in very short order. What does this really mean for conservative Americans, and by extension, I think conservatives outside of the U.S.? Because we want the same thing for our neighbors to the south. Right now, neither country is really looking that good economically between Canada and the U.S. I've had her on the show before, but I wanted to bring her back for this. I'm joined by my friend and colleague in radio, Stacey Washington. She's an Emmy-nominated TV host in the U.S., also the host of a radio show in St. Louis, Missouri. And also, I might add, a wonderful all-around great conservative blogger at StaceyOnTheRight.com. Stacey, great to have you on the show today. Thank you very much for coming on.
Thank you, Andrew, for having me on this really, really icy cold day.
So it's bad down there as well?
Yes, it's really bad. It's like 14 here, and I'm just waiting on my global warming. I've been sorely disappointed, and I'm just like, where is it? I mean, what do I have to do? So, yeah.
Yeah, see, I mean, that, for I don't know the conversion in my head to Celsius, but for us right now, I'm guessing we'd probably describe it as balmy.
Well, I mean, for those who enjoy the turn of phrase and the very varied usage of the English language, yes, balmy sounds fantastic. But I mean, for me, I just feel cold, and we have a little like portable. It looks like a little radiator. You just push two buttons and it heats up, and so it adds extra heat to the room. So I got that going on. I have one kid at home sick, two are at school, and I'm coming off of a really rough cold, and I blame it all on Al Gore because he promised me, completely New York would be underwater, California would be half its size underwater as well, and it would at least in the Midwest in the middle of winter be like 89 degrees.
Well, and that was all supposed to have happened by I think this year or last year, and 2015. And now that we've seen what happened in New Hampshire last night, a lot of people are probably wishing we were all underwater, I think.
Well, here's the interesting part, because we can pick apart the numbers all we want, but it was a sound smackdown for Hillary Clinton last night by Bernie Sanders, bringing in the youth vote, bringing in the women. He was ahead of Hillary on the women. But most importantly, everywhere, every demographic, they all pulled a lever of the 8,900 of them or so who voted for Sanders. So it's not really shocking because New Hampshire is an extremely liberal state, and it's also 98.5% white. So you don't have a huge black population there to kind of skew votes and for Hillary, because blacks have so far not felt the burn, as he says so much. But there's a more interesting fact that's just coming out, which is that the DNC is still going to award Hillary with 15 delegates, and Bernie, after winning 60% of the vote, will only walk away with 13.
I saw that earlier this morning, the numbers here, and obviously the Democrats have this weird system. They have their super delegates, which are not necessarily connected to the electoral showing. I was wondering...
They actually don't have to do anything. These people they're able to vote for whoever they want, no matter what the popular vote totals are.
And it's a system that really, by design, rewards the establishment, it looks like, and you can't really get much more establishment in the Democratic Party than Hillary Clinton.
Well, because you only have to find those people, the super delegates. Let's say, you're running an amazing ground game. And I'm not saying that Sanders did a better ground game than Hillary. But let's say you are that person who's working really hard, knocking doors, going to these meet and greets and all these different little clam bakes or whatever they're called. And you're doing the pressing of the flesh in the GOTV. And Hillary only has to find those 24 pledged delegates and take them out to dinner, maybe stop by their houses and do some photo ops, listen to their concerns about specific issues, pork spending, whatever, and she gets their pledges. It means no matter what happens at the polls, she walks away with the delegates that she needs, because that's what this game is all about. It's not really about finding so many voters to vote for you. It's about getting the nomination. And then the Democrats will fall in line after the nominee. And they are pretty sure it's going to be Hillary. And the young women who are refusing to vote for Hillary, the youth in general, they're going to be sorely disappointed when they see this party that they claim to control, the party of the people, the party of the 99%, when they nominate a 70-some-year-old woman, well, I think she's 69, who hasn't driven a car in 25 years, who hasn't pumped her own gas in 25 years, a woman who's been in public office or an accoutrement to public office for so long that she's so out of touch with regular Americans that she says the kinds of things that she says on a regular basis.
And let's not forget also a woman who's under FBI investigation as of this week.
Oh, well, we all
water under the bridge, right?
Investigation. Well, so here's what's funny about that. I was listening to some radio, and I had to look it up, and it turns out any American citizen, there's only one thing you can say about being under FBI investigation, which is you can say, I don't know. You can never say, I'm not under FBI investigation, because until they give that TOG letter to your attorney, you can be under investigation by the FBI without them notifying you for 36 months.
Wow.
So any person in this country, any person can be under investigation by the FBI for 36 months. You can say to your friends, I don't know if I'm under investigation, but if you want to be completely honest, you can never say you're not, because you never know if you are or not until the 36 months is up, and they send your attorney, the attorney of record if you have one, a letter stating that you have been and are under investigation by the Federal Bureau of Investigation for yada, yada, yada. So when she was talking about, I know I'm not under investigation, she was actually lying and perjuring herself as if she were on the stand, but she's an attorney, so she should know better. And so there's so much going on with that email thing. But President Obama and Valerie Jarrett and all of the Obama administration officials are implicated in this because they emailed back and forth with Hillary Clinton and were aware the classified information was being exchanged over an unsecure server. They knew she had a private homebrew server, and they still communicated with her and sent her classified documents. The stripping of the documents is what's being investigated, of the classification symbols and notifications. But the long and the short of it is she's guilty of a felony that I, as a regular person, were I still on active duty in the Air Force because I'm a veteran, and I still remember those briefings. That's how scary they were. I only had a secret clearance. I didn't have the same clearance she has. She's top secret, SCI, and above. Her clearance is very, very high. And they told us, if you lose track of documents, if you print off classified information and take it out of this secure facility, you will be held responsible for that. And Leavenworth is your destination. I'll never forget how scared I was. And I got that briefing once a year for every year I was on active duty and handled classified material. So for her to say she didn't know or that she's not aware, or all of these things are just parsing of words, like the meaning of what the word is. She's guilty of a felony, and she should be getting cuffed right now instead of getting awarded these delegates.
And I wanted to actually ask about that a little bit further, because in the grand scheme of things, what happens in New Hampshire, it does set momentum and fundraising potential and all that stuff. It's not, from a delegate perspective, the most significant. But this phenomenon that we've seen here, where she can lose the popular vote but still come away with more delegates, is that something that we could see replicated on Super Tuesday when there are a lot more delegates in play, where she could lose the popular vote and still come out ahead of Sanders?
Well, I think anything's possible, but you have to look at the state and what their rules are. So that's the part that most Americans aren't paying attention to. And it takes a lot of time, because you first have to find out, okay, what's the next state on the primary schedule? Then you have to look and see what their system is. Is it a caucus? Is it a primary? Do they have super delegates? And then you look and see what the rules are. And there have been a lot of rules changes, because I don't know if you know this as Canadians, but every 4 years, both parties go through their conventions for the presidential nominations.
Yeah.
And during that, they set the rules for the next presidential nominating process. So every 4 years, the rules are different, either substantially or nominally. So I actually haven't looked ahead to see if she can do this again. I think it would be really unpopular for her media-wise, except the media provides her with so much cover, because they do want her as opposed to Bernie Sanders. There was a really interesting question asked by an audience member at one of his town halls. She said, I actually like some of your ideas, and I would love to support you, but you've already said you want a revolution in government, and that you espouse things that none of your colleagues support. And she said, how would you ever get the buy-in that you need from Congress as president to pass any of these ideas that you want, since you're the only socialist in government right now? There aren't any other people like you, and you need Congress to pass law. Presidents don't make law. And he was completely flummoxed. He could not answer that. So
it's terrifying that the only challenging question, though, he's ever had to face is from an audience member at a town hall.
Exactly. The media is completely derelict. But the point that she made, I took it to be kind of an encouragement to me, in that even Democrats realize that while he's fun and interesting, at least the older ones, not the younger millennials, but the older ones, the ones who work and pay taxes and have actually had to be held accountable, they understand that in the general, Bernie Sanders is our dream candidate on the right, because he says so many idiotic, unexplainable things, and the ads against him would be epic and legendary. And he doesn't have a leg to stand on pushing socialism in a country that has a constitution that mandates that we're a republic, a representative republic. So Americans don't have socialism baked into the cake, dyed in the wool. We don't idolize it. We don't revere it. We are very individualistic. And I'm counting on that, even with our ridiculous K through 12 education system and the indoctrination they've been able to pull off for the past 30 years. I'm counting on the people who vote the most to still understand that socialism in America is not a concept that we can fully buy into, because it simply won't work here.
I want to turn from the Democrat primary to the Republican primary. This is obviously the big one that a lot of people were wondering about. Will Donald Trump's star fade? Will he end up being a flash in the pan? Doesn't look like it now. We're seeing a guy who's been at the top of Republican primary and caucus polls for most of the time that he's been in the running, rather. And though he did not win in Iowa, he obviously did win last night in New Hampshire by quite a strong margin. Let's talk about two sides here. Do you think that all the conservatives and the Republicans who are knocking him in the press and speaking out publicly will fall in line behind him if he is the nominee?
I think it depends on who the Democrats have. So if the Democrats have Hillary, I have at least 4 or 5 friends that are politically, astute, who've told me they'll never pull the lever for Trump. Now, I've told them, as much as I don't want Trump to be president, the choice is between Donald Trump, a known narcissist and television reality show star, businessman, but someone who really thinks that politicians are to be bought and sold like commodities, and as a narcissist. I have to say that twice. The choice between him and two people who are on the spectrum of socialism. So obviously, I would have to vote for Trump, the same way I voted for Mitt Romney, even though I didn't want him, the same way I voted for McCain, even though I didn't want him. So I think that Republicans would reluctantly vote for him, but there would be millions of evangelicals who would stay home the same way they did with Romney, making it easier for Hillary or Sanders to actually win. The key here is that Donald Trump, it's not inevitable for him, but some more people have to drop out. In order to solidify the votes needed to build another candidate up to the level that Trump is at, you have to have some of these other candidates drop out. If it's just Trump and Rubio, Rubio wins. If it's just Trump and Cruz, it would be close, but I think Cruz could pull it off. But the longer Jeb Bush, John Kasich, and the others stay in the race, the more diluted the totals are, the more people will see Donald Trump as inevitable and line up behind him because they want to be with the winner. And he knows that. That's why he's trying to keep Ben Carson in the race. That's why he's hinting at Ben possibly being his VP. He's not going to choose Ben Carson as his VP, but he wants Ben to think that, so Ben will stay in the race as long as possible because that benefits Donald Trump.
And I think that you are bang on there when you talk about the vote splitting component here, because the fact is Trump is in a league of his own, whereas a lot of the other candidates in the Republican race are really trying to go after the same votes or the same type of votes here. And with Christie out, not that he was ever polling huge numbers anyway, I think that may make a marginal shift in what you're talking about here, putting a more united front on the non-Trump voters. I would also ask you, though, here, when we're looking at Trump's candidacy, a lot of his supporters, if you knock him, will say, oh, this is just political correctness and you don't like that he tells it like it is. No, I couldn't really care less about what he says. I care that he's not a conservative. That's my objection to him.
Here's two big issues that I would encourage anyone who thinks that people are knocking him because he uses foul language, because we all have someone in our life who is fantastic at what they do and is also a foul-mouthed, kind of knuckle dragger. These people are successful. You don't have to be genteel and have a proper decorum to be successful in life. That's not my issue with him, although I don't really appreciate his language. That's not the issue. The issue is that Donald Trump absolutely doesn't understand why conservatives oppose eminent domain. He thinks it's a proper tool for businessmen to move forward projects that they think are more important than people's private property ownership rights. The second thing is Donald Trump wants universal health care. He doesn't understand that universal health care means people like me, who I am rightly so paying out of the nose for a Cadillac plan so that I don't have health care limits and I have an extraordinarily high deductible, individual and family, and we choose to pay that because we like having a Cadillac plan. We would be forced onto Medicare, which is not health care. It's access to health care that you can't get because doctors in America refuse to accept Medicare because the reimbursements are so poor, and it's an absolute loss for them. There's no motivating factor to encourage doctors, especially high-quality physicians and specialists, to accept Medicare payments. So people who are on Medicare don't actually have access to health care. They just have health insurance, government health insurance, which is subpar, and actually is worse than having ER-only coverage or no coverage at all. So those two factors alone make Donald Trump a very dangerous proposition for the Republicans, because he would then go on as president to enact policies that we have been railing against for the past 8 years. And all of our think tanks, Cato, Heritage, everyone who matters in the world of public policy, have all spoken out against the very things that he is most supportive of. So it's a huge problem that we have, and it's an intellectual discussion. And so if people want to get mired in on what kind of talking he does or what his tweets say, I really encourage them to look at his policies and what he's advocating before they begin to accuse people who don't support Donald Trump of having a problem with his language. Language is not an issue for me. If you look at the letters from our earliest founders here in this country, some of them were very, very blunt, frank individuals, and their insults towards each other bordered on the vulgar, but they were also highly functioning, extraordinarily intelligent individuals who were creative and gave us a system that we have today. So the words aren't the issue, it's the policies with Trump.
Yeah, the point he's making with those words. Joined on the line by Stacey Washington, Emmy-nominated TV personality and radio host in St. Louis. Stacey, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me, Andrew.
Obviously, closer to the election, we'll have some more voices on about it and what's going on there. But she's absolutely wonderful. Her website, StaceyOnTheRight.com. And I have to say as well on that note, no, the profanity is not the problem. I don't care when Donald Trump gets up there and repeats that a woman called Ted Cruz a pussy. It's unpresidential, but it doesn't bother me as much as its actual policies. As much as the fact that he has donated countless amounts of dollars to Democrats in the past. The fact that he has never really expressed any sense of conservatism, and still he decided starting to look at running for office. Before he spoke at CPAC a couple of years ago, no one had ever heard him as anything of a scholar on the right. And that's my problem here, is that he says things and then tries to figure out how to make it work later. And this is the thing. I've had a lot of criticism from people on the right that have said, oh, you know what, I'm caving to the establishment, blah, 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 blah. No, to me, he's anti-establishment in a different way. I don't see Marco Rubio, who I like, as being an establishment guy. Even Ted Cruz, who I was never a huge fan of, I would take over Donald Trump. Jeb Bush, not happening. I can't wait until he gets out of there as well. I think what Stacey said that is bang on the money, though, is that we need the field to start dropping in numbers so that people start getting behind viable alternatives to Donald Trump. And here's the thing. This isn't to say that I don't think he has offered something to the race. I think he has, well, maybe it is. I don't know what he's offered. I mean, he's reframed the discussion, certainly. I really liked Carly Fiorina. She was never my pick to run, but I liked a lot of the things that she was saying. But again, I also remember when she ran for the Senate in California, she was the rhino. She was the moderate. And it's amazing how short people's memories are, because she comes out as this conservative superstar this time around, reinventing herself. Well, a load of good it did her. But again, she, Ben Carson, these are smart, good people. They're not presidential candidates, though. They're people that would make a great running mate or make a great senator. Heck, I'm still holding out for Rick Perry to make a comeback, although I'm pretty sure he's dashed that when he bowed out this time around. We've got to take a break here, but I'm curious what you think about it. My email address is andrew@andrewlawton.ca. Always interested in hearing different thoughts and perspectives on this or any of the other issues we cover here on the program. You're listening to Lawton Online here on the rebel.media. Stay tuned.
You're listening to Lawton Online with your host, Andrew Lawton, exclusively on the rebel.media. Email your thoughts to Andrew at andrewlawton.ca or tweet Andrew using @AndrewLawton.
We are back here on Lawton Online on the rebel.media. So good to have you tuned into the program today. This is going to be a really unique segment here. It's not often I try to bring you a voice from the left. I mean, David Suzuki, I played that interview I did, and I played parts of my interview with Justin Trudeau back when he was the Liberal Party leader. But typically, I try to make this a safe space for conservatives to use language with which the left would be very familiar now. Well, I have to break with that tradition for this segment of this program here, because I feel that we as people on the right are owed a little bit of an explanation as to how the liberal mind works. Now, maybe I'm being a little bit too generous with that, but I saw news this week that the Canadian Federation of Students, a student union that has a presence on a huge number of campuses across the country, was advocating on Parliament Hill for the past week in 200 meetings for free education. I mean, not free, but free for students, university and college education to the tune of $3.3 billion a year that the federal government, they think, should transfer to provinces to make this happen. Now, we have to acknowledge one thing for starters here, that post-secondary education is already heavily subsidized by the government, by the federal government, by provincial governments, and let's not forget, by government-backed student loans. Let's also note here that healthcare in Canada, which they believe education should be modeled after, is failing. So just because it's universal and we have a system that's based on it being universal, that doesn't mean that's something that we should copy. But no, the Canadian Federation of Students is saying that we need to make post-secondary education universal, acceptable, and accessible for all. Okay. So a few things are missing from this. I wanted to get to the bottom of this, so I'm very pleased to welcome Bilan Art to the show. She's the national chairperson for the Canadian Federation of Students, which is pushing for this. Bilan, thanks very much for coming on the program today.
Thank you for having me.
So this is obviously a group that you represent that is on a number of different campuses. You have a number of student stakeholders that you're working for here. Talk to me about what some of the requests or hopes your group had on Parliament Hill were.
Absolutely. Well, the Canadian Federation of Students is Canada's largest and oldest organization representing post-secondary students at both the university and college level. And actually, our members are incredibly concerned about the reality and the context in which students are finding themselves in today, and the realities of the erosion of public funding for post-secondary education that we've seen from governments over the past decade. Young people are paying insurmountable amounts for a university or college level education that it was required by more than 70% of new jobs today, so that we're finding ourselves in a position where once we graduate from high school, it's very clear to us that we need to pursue post-secondary education in order to be successful in today's job market, and by virtue of that, to be successful in today's society. But we're also being forced to contend with an education that continues to have a rising price tag attached to it, rising at a very alarming rate across the board, across the country, and young people are increasingly having to contend with taking on huge, crushing amounts of student debt in order to help pay the insurmountable price tag that comes with getting that education. And so for a lot of us, we're finding ourselves in a very tight bind. It's incredibly important for us to get this education, but we're finding it more and more unattainable. And so what we have done is put together a plan to actually have federal government present real leadership in Ottawa, recognizing that we have a new government that was elected. We met with over 200 members of parliament and senators over the past week, and we presented to them the realities and the context that young people are facing that I just explained, but we also presented that not only are we presenting the context, we have some solutions. We know that the federal government is already spending an enormous amount of money funding different tax credit and savings scheme programs that could be better allocated and reinvested into just funding upfront public education. And that was the plan that we presented.
The problem is, though, you talk about the fact that it's necessary for a great deal of people to have a university or college education, but at the same time, the unemployment rate among graduates is rising because ultimately we have a lot of jobs where that's not necessary, and the people that seem to be doing the best unemployment are the people that are going into the trades, going into apprenticeships, etc. So do we really want to be encouraging more people to have a post-secondary education, which really seems to have historically devalued the value of that education?
Well, actually, the reality in the context of the job market today is that young people are facing, as you've already alluded to, a very precarious job market. We have seen the developments of a particular industry, but I would add to that and perhaps challenge that argument a bit by also highlighting the realities that regardless and irrespective of the different types of fields that young people are interested in pursuing, there's a certain specializations of skill that is being required by employers that isn't actually being presented in terms of workplace on-the-job training, whereas what we've actually seen is almost the complete erosion of entry-level positions in favor of our unpaid internships. And so you're correct in saying that young people are dealing with huge amounts of unemployment rates. In fact, young people are facing double the rate of unemployment of the general population, closer to 14% across Canada. But that's because when young people are applying for jobs, employers are expecting a huge amount of on-the-job skills and training that they don't have access to unless they agree to work for free. And so students are finding themselves in a position where they're graduating from post-secondary education and they're getting the education that they need because they're all right in understanding and recognizing that a majority of jobs today are not just happy with a grade 12 level education. There is some sort of education and skills training that you need to get at either the university or college level. But now, even when you're applying for that work, there is an expectation that you already have on-the-job training, even as you've just completed your post-secondary studies. And when we look at some of the fields, that have historically, and even today, perhaps had a perception of being more in demand, what we also know is that the market is constantly in flux and changing. And where we have in the past identified there to be shortages in the labor market, for example, in Ontario, we've seen, governments in the past really highlight the need for teachers. And so there was a really big push to put young people through post-secondary education and to put them through teachers' college. But then what happened when we had a huge influx of young people coming out and graduating from teachers' college, suddenly that demand wasn't needed anymore. And in fact, when we talk about some of the realities of the current labor market around the resource extraction industry, there was a huge push to put students through post-secondary education and particularly get them specifically trained in skills related to resource extraction, and now that demand doesn't exist in the labor market anymore. And so as much as we're also presenting a vision, and we did last week when we were talking and meeting with MPs about making public education accessible to all Canadians, we also stress the importance of leadership from the federal government in developing a robust youth employment strategy that would clearly indicate how young people can be successful in transferring and moving from the post-secondary sector into the labor force, and thus creating more employable youth, more youth with more gainful employment opportunities across the board, and that consequently will mean that more young people will be earning more and bringing back in terms of tax dollars. It's not helpful for our country to have young people carrying so much amounts of debt because of the education that they got and then not being able to find a job. These are all issues that young people are facing today that we need leadership on.
Yeah, but how is it any better than for the government to be carrying a lot of debt when they're the ones paying for that education? I mean, there still is a cost to it. It has to be paid for by someone. Why is it not the responsibility of individual students to work, to save, or to go into debt and pay that off later on when they are employed?
I think that what we need to start recognizing and accepting is a concept and the standard around universality when it comes to post-secondary education. Listen, when we think about K-12 education, it was the reality that a few generations ago, Canada as a whole came to understand that it wasn't no longer acceptable for the entire population to not have a certain standard for education. We set that standard at grade 12 level, and we also recognize that because young people needed to have that grade 12 level education in order to be successful in today's society. Well, in today's world, and if we think about the present and current context, grade 12 is not enough. If we're actually serious as a country about lifting communities out, especially communities that are affected by perpetual low income, low socioeconomic statuses, then we need to actually be thinking about how we can play a greater equalizer role in these societies by bringing in access to post-secondary education so that those communities can actually uplift themselves from these cycles of poverty. And we know that getting a post-secondary education, for a fact, is one of the greatest social equalizers in society that we have today. And so we need to, I think, embrace more a concept around universality and creating a national standard of access for post-secondary education where students aren't paying differential levels of fees based on the province or region they happen to be in. And I think that we also need to think about ways in which we've already accepted these concepts, whether that's K-12 education or recognizing universal access to healthcare, right? I mean, we have a national strategy around that because we recognize that Canadians from coast to coast need to have access to healthcare. It's a fundamental need in their lives. Well, in today's society, in today's world, if you want to be successful, you need some university or college level education. And so why is it that only the people who can afford to go to
are you saying that plumbers, welders, millwrights aren't successful?
No, I'm including college level education.
No, but you know, a lot of them a lot of them are employed because they took apprenticeships and didn't go to college. Why should they have to subsidize university educations for people that aren't going to be able to find a job after they get a social sciences degree?
Because we need to have a well-rounded society. It is not the case that we will always have demand in one particular sector. It is the case that we will always need all of these skills. It is the case that we will always need college graduates, that we will always need polytechnic graduates, and it is the case that we will always need university graduates and graduates that are trained in a particular professional field.
But will we all need people who have BAs in sociology, though? That doesn't seem like a good investment for the state.
I think that we need a variety and a diversity of different skills and training because we need those students who are getting their bachelor's or their master's degree in the social sciences because we need community development to happen in a meaningful way in our communities. But conversely, we also need architects and we also need lawyers. We need engineers, we need plumbers, we need electricians. We need all of these roles and we need all of these skills to be available to all Canadians to be able to develop. We need to stop pigeonholing young people into a particular type of field and actually start more broadly speaking, opening up our post-secondary institutions so that all Canadians can access them, ensuring there is enough funding for them at a base level so that they don't have to rely on tuition fees to fund our public education system, and then ensuring that when all Canadians have the opportunity to access various different types of skills and training opportunities, they're able to access a job market that is favorable towards them, that is going to allow them to have gainful employment, and then to be able to bring back and pay back into the system through the tax system that we already have. And that's how we have a loop that continues to ensure a standard for universality and access.
Belan Art joins me on the line, National Chairperson for the Canadian Federation of Students. I really appreciate your time today. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you for having me.
She is very handily the Bernie Sanders of Canadian student activists, I think. Oh, my goodness. I mean, I tried to keep up. I did. I tried to keep up. Maybe I'm the slow one here. But I feel like something was missing, which is the value. And she wasn't able to demonstrate that. No one in her position can demonstrate that. The fact is, a university degree specifically is less valuable now than ever. The reason there is such an inability for university graduates to pay it back is because they're not getting a job. And the worst case scenario, the worst thing we could do would be to make it so that it is no strings attached, that anyone can get it, that you can use it to buy yourself some time, to delay your own foray or entry into adulthood. You're going to have a lot of people that think, oh, well, I don't want to do anything with my life. So, hey, the government is basically extending the amount of time I can do nothing with my life by at least 4 years. What about a master's degree? Should the state pay for that? What if you take 8 years to do your degree? Should the state pay for that? Where are the rules on this? Where's the sense in this? Where's the backing on this? And once again, who's going to pay for it? People that get out and find a job, or the people that don't take advantage of it, go into the real world and start paying taxes, and then they're the ones that have to pay for it, even though they didn't even benefit from it. Again, it's the same as that flawed leftist socialist mentality about healthcare. That it is a duty, that you have a right to it. You have a right to seek whatever you want for yourself. You have a right to work, to earn a living. Not a right to have a job, but a right to seek that. And I also think we need to dispense with this notion that you are owed this. You know, there was a meme circulating online that I actually came across yesterday. It's a caption that says, this is a list of all the things that you are owed and entitled to in your life. And then the picture below it is a blank sheet of paper and a pen. So maybe it means you're owed a pen and a pad of paper, or maybe it means you are owed absolutely nothing. But the Canadian Federation of Students is thriving off of entitlement, thriving off of this belief that you are apparently owed a university education. And the funny thing is, there's the economic argument against it, that we can't afford it, that we don't have the money for it. But then there's the question of value. We're doing students or would-be students a disservice if we tell them that this is something that's actually going to benefit their lives, because the fact of the matter is, it's not. I think you come out dumber on the other side. And what's interesting is there's a great British writer, or should I say was a great British writer, Doris Lessing. Now, this name may ring a bell for a lot of you. She was once a very ardent communist. And then when she left communism, she became a fierce critic not only of communism and Marxism, but also feminism and political correctness. And she gave a number of remarks. I think she died about 2 years ago in the 90s when she was quite well respected in certain circles, talking about how education, university education, was Marxism, was political correctness, was censorship, was what George Orwell called, or George Orwell rather, newspeak. And this was back in, I think, 92, one of her famous speeches on the subject, which was later adapted into a print piece. It has only gotten worse in the 24 years since then. It's only gotten more dramatic a phenomenon in the 2.5 decades since she made that observation. And when you have the people representing university students, the people representing university students coming out and saying it should be free for everyone, well, that shows that they're not really learning something. And the reason I asked Bilan in my interview with her about, let's say, sociology as an example, is because I think we need to be making sure that if someone is getting a subsidized tuition rate, that they're at least offering something to society. If we were going to do this, I mean, let's face it, the government already subsidizes more than 3/4 of university tuition fees in general. And we can look at how publicly funded universities are a little bit too top-heavy and paying people a lot too much. But I would even take a step back and say, why don't we eliminate the subsidy for all non-essential degrees, eliminate the subsidy for anything that has an unemployment rate above, 5%. All of a sudden, you're going to have a heck of a lot more people that are going towards engineering, natural sciences, etc., than people going into basket weaving, gender studies, feminist literature, philosophy. I mean, let's face it, you may have fun taking philosophy, and I took a year of philosophy as well, but I don't think you're going to be getting a job at that brand new philosophy factory they're opening up down the street. You know, I still support the print industry. Every now and then I'll flip through the classifieds. I haven't seen someone with that degree being sought out. But the myth you get given from these people, and I'm a university-educated person, by the way, is that, well, the process of going to school alone is enriching and edifying. I'm pretty sure that the 4 years you could have spent working or even traveling, and traveling would probably be cheaper than university, but working, certainly you come out ahead, would give you more than that degree would if you're not going into a line of work where a degree is necessary. If you're going into medicine, into law, into dentistry, into engineering, etc., yeah, you need that degree. And that's not to say that people shouldn't go to university for fun, they want to enjoy it, whatever the case may be. Yeah, go if you want. If that's what you really want, go. But pay for yourself. And we're starting to see an about face on this. Companies recognizing, hey, maybe this degree is not the best measure of someone's worth. Ernst & Young, the global firm, they abandoned their requirement for someone to have a university degree to apply. Penguin Random House did as well. That was actually, I think, in January of this past year that the publishing company said, we're still going to look at someone's education in the context of their broader application, but we will accept them from people who haven't gone to university. And I actually found it quite absurd that Bilan mentioned to me, and I called her on it, of course. Someone is only a success if they've gone to post-secondary education, university or college. She didn't seem to realize that, no, you can have an apprenticeship without ever going to college. And a lot of college programs exist to teach people something that they could have learned in the real world. For example, they have college programs on hospitality and tourism. I'm pretty sure working in a restaurant would give you a lot of the same insight that you gleaned from a program like that. It's not my responsibility to tell you what to do with your own life. If you want a degree, if you want to be one of these people that goes to school for 12 years to get, 3-4 bachelor's degrees, that's fine. That's your call. But you've got to be the one to pay for that. You've got to be the one that has to decide, is this an investment? And if it's not an investment, if it's just an expenditure, then you have to question why you're doing it. You know, that character in Field of Dreams, Kevin Costner, had whispered to him, if you build it, he will come. Well, if you budget for it, people will spend it. If you tell them, hey, we've paid for your tuition, go wild, even if people don't need it nor want it, they're going to take it because it's there, because it's free. It's the same reason as people take things out of free sample jars that they would never actually pay money for, because it's free, it's there. So all that I learned from that is that, hey, there are a bunch of students wasting their time on Parliament Hill campaigning for entitlement for all of those that pay dues to them. We've got to wrap things up for the program today, folks. I want to give a big thanks to my guests for the show and all who tuned in, of course. This has been an episode, another one, of Lawton Online here on The Rebel. I'm Andrew Lawton. We'll talk to you next week, Canada. God bless you.
Thanks for tuning in to Lawton Online. Check out the rebel.media for lots more fearless content and commentary.